everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, the only podcast with old friends discussing old comics with the people that created them. I'm Joe Marcello, joined as always by my partners in crime, Orrin Phillips.
Hey, everybody.
And Mike Farah.
Howdy.
Well, everybody, your wait is over. It is that time again. It's Wednesday. It's hump day. It's comic book day. But most importantly, it's Dollar Bin Bandit Day. And today we are proud to present to you our latest episode with our interview with Steve Englehart. Now, I love his work for obvious reasons. He had a great long career at DC. He worked on a lot of stuff that I love, specifically Green Lantern Corps, Green Lantern, Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, as well as a lot of work on Batman, The Dark Knight Detective, list goes on.
Yeah, and I'm a sort of a weirdo nerd, so I love talking to him about his time on the Epic line for Marvel, doing Coyote, one of the more standout books of the line, and his thoughts on it, his thoughts working on creator-owned projects, and really interesting insight.
Yeah, I'm even weirder than Orrin in that I liked hearing about Ultraverse and Valiant. So he was part of both of those nascent universes that came out during the early 90s, writing for Exo Man of War, Shadow Man at Valiant, and then quite a few of the comics and titles at Ultraverse, which is part of Malibu, such as Nightman, The Strangers, Prototype, Hardcase. All those names you really remember because they just stood the test of time and they're still around with us today. But let's get on to the conversation. This is Steve Englehart.
So I'm going to start off at the beginning. How did you get involved in comics?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, I got involved in comics because I was a reader. I still remember the first comics I ever read. It was a Batman and a detective. So I grew up liking comics in the 50s when this was, sadly. People basically outgrew comics because they were for kids and that was pretty much it. But I got back into them when I was in college. The Marvel age had started at that time. Somebody shoved a Ditko Spider-Man in my face and I was set after that. As far as actually getting into the business, this will probably take your entire hour, but
okay.
I got out of college. It was Vietnam War time, so I was taken into the Army. I was stationed in Maryland. One weekend, I decided I had time off, and I decided to take the train up and come up and go see Neil Adams at DC Comics. I can't remember now whether I just wanted to go to DC or Neil. And I was just nobody. I don't even know why I thought I could do that, except in those days, it wasn't that hard, really. I had actually, while I was in college, I had gone to New York and gone to DC, and they ushered me in kind of like, I don't know, what do we do with this guy, So I knew it wasn't impossible to get into those days. Anyway, I ended up working for Neil Adams while I was still in the Army. I would come up every weekend and do art stuff with him. And so when I got out of the Army, I had an entree to get into New York. And in those days, everybody had to go to New York if you wanted to be in comics, right? I mean, there were a few outliers. Sal Buscema lived in Washington, D.C. John Severin was out in Denver, I think. But pretty much, basically, if you wanted to be in comics, you moved to New York. And so I did. And the good thing about it was everybody in comics knew everybody. I mean, we were all in New York, so that you saw very quickly, even as the new guy, you got to know people that you were reading now, people who were famous from the past, like Wally Wood and Bill Everett and stuff like that. And out of that came an offer. Gary Friedrich decided to go back to his hometown in Missouri for the summer. And he asked me if I would like to fill in for him on staff at Marvel. And I almost said no, but I said yes. And then once you're on staff at Marvel, they give you freelance work. And then it just sort of, I wasn't doing art anymore. I was doing writing. And that's the quickest I can tell that story.
Well, that's part of where I want to start with when you're at Marvel. You worked on a few things, and then you got a book I liked a lot, Defenders.
Right.
Now, were you able to pick the characters? I know at the time Hulk and Submariner and Doctor Strange were kind of good co-stars, but had a hard time driving their own book. So were they put together for you, or were you able to pick them yourself?
Actually, they were put together. Roy Thomas put them together. He did when he was writing the Submariner. I think he was writing the Submariner and Doctor Strange. I don't know if he was writing the Hulk, but he started putting twosomes together,
right.
And the sales were good. So then he created the Defenders,
right.
And he did 3 issues in Marvel, whatever, premiere, feature, whatever it might have been. And then he handed it off to me. So even though I'm start with Defenders #1, I'm actually like number 6 in the queue. So it was decided that it would be those 3 guys. And then he had done some story that also involved the Silver Surfer. So I asked if I could have the Silver Surfer, and they let me have that too. And then I put in Valkyrie. That's my contribution. So, you know.
Did you see a lot of potential? I mean, you had to have seen potential in each one of these characters.
Well, I love these guys, you know. I mean, as you say, they weren't necessarily selling all that well. I don't know, Hulk might have been. Submariner probably not. And Doctor Strange, sort of, maybe not. But they all had that they all had a darkness to them, and they had that nice thing about we're not team players.
Right.
And here we are on a team. So there was a lot of interesting stuff to do with them, I thought. And again, you know, I mean, my trajectory there, having gotten on staff and gotten freelance work, was, I mean, I started out writing monster stories and romance stories, because in those days Marvel did those, and that's how you learned or proved your worth without screwing up any superheroes, right? But so then graduating to the superheroes was like the big deal, and I got the Beast first, and then almost immediately afterwards I got Captain America and the Defenders, right? And so I'm still like just in awe that I'm doing this at all, right? And so Defenders was one of my early books, and both of those books, Captain America and Defenders, were with Sal Buscema, who I really credit a lot with, you know, whatever I became, because Sal was one of those guys. He was just old school, and you could ask him to draw anything, and he'd draw it, you know. And there are some artists who can't draw horses, or they can't draw hands, or they can't draw this or that. But Sal could do anything. And so as I was exploring what I could do, I never had to say, well, I can't do that because it's got a horse in it, you know, or whatever. And so Sal was, you know, a wonderful collaborator to, you know, for a young guy sort of figuring out what he could do.
Was it tough?
Anyway, Defenders, yeah.
I was gonna say, was it tough as a young writer having to do a team book, because each one has its own voice, each one has its own backstory, and kind of putting those together?
Well, I like that. I mean, one of the things that I really liked about Marvel, when I was a fan, I read everybody. I mean, comics were cheap, you know, and so I read Marvels and DCs and Gold Keys and, you know, whatever else, Charlton's, whatever there were.
Right.
So I was a big fan of comics in general. And I also was reading up, you know, Will Eisner's, or not Will Eisner, Jules Pfeiffer's book about the early heroes, which was one of the few things we had where I could see what the original Human Torch was and read stories about I mean, I was really into comics. And so, and again, I thought I was headed on an art thing, but it turned out that I really like to get inside each one of these characters' heads. I mean, I like, you know, not in the sense that I'm the Hulk, you know, but it's like, if I were the Hulk, what would I do is kind of my approach to all these things. And I found, you know, I can really see the differences and the nuances between them. I knew everything about them, right? So I was able to draw on that. So no, I you know, really like that when later with the Avengers, later with the Green Lantern Corps. I mean, all these groups, I liked every character, you know, I mean, I got into every character. And when I say liked, I mean that too, because comic, you know, writing, you're sitting alone in a room. And if you're not having a good time, you might get the paycheck, but you know, it's like, but I really had a great time. So, I mean, it was fun for me to be all these different characters, you know, and try to convey through the page what it, you know,
Right.
who they were and so forth.
And just jumping to Avengers for a second, because you had a great run on that too. Was that tougher because they all had their own separate books, so to keep sort of a continuity going in the Avengers that wouldn't interfere with what they were doing in their own books?
It was just part of the gestalt, really. I mean, I understood that going in, and it was very, again, after a while, I moved to California, so I wasn't in New York. Kirby had moved to California, and then I might have been like the second person to like bail from New York and go to California. I don't know. So after a while, I didn't have that. But in the beginning, certainly, and the relationships got established there. It was all very collegial. I mean, if you were doing something and you wanted to do something with Iron Man, you'd go to the Iron Man writer and just say, you know, I want to do this next month. Is that okay? And he might say, well, you know, Iron Man is currently wearing a purple said armor and you know, and Happy Hogan just got killed. And it's like, okay, I'll build that in somehow. And it goes the other way too. They'd come to me and say, you know, can you do something in the Avengers here that will, you know, feed into this? It was a bullpen. It was exactly really what Stan claimed it was, you know. We were all sitting there. When I was there, we were at like 55th and Madison, I think. It was, you know, right in there somewhere. I think I was always there because I left California before they moved anyplace else. But it was a small office. It wasn't a really big office. It could hold 20 people, maybe. Wow. There were 20 of us in that office. That included Stan and Roy and, you know, and the art department. And, you know, I mean, it was a small operation. But when I got there in 1971, 72, that was when it was really starting to, you know, all those characters we were talking about, Strange and Hulk, they all got their own books. You know, it was that era. So Marvel was just riding a wave. And I happened to be one of a whole bunch of guys like Jim Starlin and Frank Brunner and Steve Gerber and Don McGregor. All these people all sort of showed up at the same time, more or less, you know. So we all just surfed that wave and took it wherever we could take it. So
I want to ask you, with the Defenders, you had Doctor Strange, and you had your own run on his book yourself.
yeah.
What did you see in Doctor Strange that you felt wasn't being utilized, and the character maybe prior that you wanted to bring out when you were writing for him solo?
Well, when I was doing him solo, he was basically a superhero who had magical beams coming out of his hands instead of thermal rays or you know, whatever. I mean, I did, you know, there were mystical elements to the whole thing, but he was basically fitting in with the team. When I wrote his own book, he was supposed to be the Sorcerer Supreme, and I thought, well, okay, I don't know anything about magic, but I can learn, you know. I mean, so I went there. There used to be a store, Lower Manhattan, called Weiser's. I forget where they were, but Weiser's was the occult bookstore. I mean, it had everything. It was a big thing, and I just went in there like a total novice and just got some sales guy and said, what do I want to start with? You know, give me the basic books here, and bought a bunch of books. And so with his own series, I really tried to make him more of a, you know, get deeper into the idea that he was a magician, that he could do these things. Right. I always said, you know, he was smarter than any one of us, and I had to like pretend to be smarter than myself, you know. Yeah, that was the thing with Strange, really trying to get the, you know, magic pumped up.
Do you think that was lacking? You know, like you said, it was lacking before. They just kind of wanted to simplify him a bit.
It was I mean, magic before was, you know, I mean, they would go to other dimensions and say, by the hoary hosts of Hoggoth and so forth. It was Marvel magic. Right. You know, it was, you know, it was magic as we defined it, but it hadn't anything to do with like
True, man.
real magic,
Right.
for want of a better term, right? So, and I didn't want to turn it into a textbook. I didn't want to take all this stuff I was reading and shovel it back out. So he still said by the hoary hosts of Haga, but I just, tried to get it more in line with actual mystical thought,
That's pretty awesome. Are you given your own freedom to do as you wanted with that book? That's cool.
All those books. I mean, in those days, again, the story is that I didn't know about for years later, but I mean, when Stan hired Roy Thomas and Denny O'Neil, he said, you guys have to sound exactly like me because I'm the only voice that there has been. And so that's what people want to hear. Makes total sense. But they were sort of drilled and tested on being able to sound like Stan. But when Roy became the editor, he didn't want to do that. And so he basically said to us, he literally said to me, I'm giving you Captain America here at this point. If you can turn it in on time and make it sell, then you can keep doing the book. It's got to sell and you've got to make your deadlines. And if you can do that, you can do anything else you want to do. So a very unusual situation in retrospect, right? But we were all given complete freedom, right? And so it's impossible to even imagine today, but he said, here's Captain America, do whatever you want to do, right? And fortunately, what I wanted to do was, because the Captain America was not selling in those days. They were still billing it as the living legend of World War II. Nobody cared about World War II. And if they did care about war, they were against it because of the Vietnam thing. And so Captain America was like this really iffy book. And that was my first experience, actually, of saying, if I were Captain America, who would I be? And that gave me the idea that he would stand for America's ideals rather than anything America was doing at any particular time. Therefore, you can skip past the Vietnam War. You can skip past, all that stuff. And by doing that, I not only, defined him forever after, but Marvel said, oh, okay, I guess this guy might have a career here, so.
Where would that rank in your achievements, your personal achievements, what you did with Captain America? Because you revived him.
Yeah, well, I have to put Batman ahead of him because they made movies out of my Batman stuff. And they're making movies out of my Captain America stuff too. But I don't get the direct credit for that because guy didn't create Captain America. I didn't create Batman either. But there's been more of an impact, I think, because it happened first, maybe more of an impact from Batman, but Captain America is up there. Yeah, that's probably 1 and 2.
Well, speaking of movies, Shang-Chi.
Yeah.
Coming out soon. You worked with Jim Starlin on that.
Yeah.
We actually spoke to Mr. Starlin. He said that he liked the book, but he was more into the galactic kind of stories like that. What were your thoughts on Shang-Chi and getting it together?
Well, I wanted to do the Eastern philosophy because I'd been doing Doctor Strange and had learned Western philosophy at that point. And so I thought, well, this will be interesting to do an Eastern philosophy. So I was interested in the philosophy. Jim, I would say, in addition to his basic galactic direction, he liked the action. He's an artist, right? So he liked the kung fu sort of stuff. That's it, because this is coming up now. I'm telling the story more and more, but so we went in and we said we want to do this guy, and Marvel was really not interested. They didn't see any potential at all for a kung fu thing. And in order for us to do it, they insisted that Shang-Chi be half white, which was not what we wanted to do. And they insisted that Fu Manchu be in there because Fu Manchu was a name, right? Mm-hmm. Now, 50 years later, I'm seeing interviews with people who work on the movie go, yeah, those early stories were racist. And it's like, well, what can I tell you? I mean, we were a couple of white guys. On the other hand, we did create an Asian character, and there weren't any Asian guys around to create an Asian character. So, but anyway, we did that, and then like a month or two, no more than that, after Shang-Chi actually came out, just Kung Fu exploded worldwide. It just became this huge thing. And I don't think we had much to do with it. I mean, we might have given it a little nudge, but we weren't the impetus or anything. But all of a sudden, Marvel thought Kung Fu was the greatest thing ever. And so, you know, let's create Iron Fist, and let's do a black and white Shang-Chi book, and let's do specials, and let's do annuals. And I was wanting to write philosophy, and I couldn't write it, you know, 6 times a month, you know, and all this kind of stuff. So Jim, he bailed after 3 issues, and I bailed after 5 color issues and 2 black and white issues, and then you know, it went on from there, and you know, and then Doug Mensch and Paul Galassi took it over, and after a while, they turned it into a really, I really like what they did. Right. The whole James Bond and international intrigue thing that Shang-Chi turned into. But that's our story, Starlin's and my story of this. Right. So the movie, you know, and again, I would say Marvel does not consult with the original writers on this stuff. They give us credit, screen credit. They give us royalty money if we created stuff. I mean, you know, it's all basically ethical. But I don't know any more about the Shang-Chi movie than you do. Probably less even, you know.
To that, sorry, I just want to jump in just to that point. So, you know, obviously you don't know any more than we do, but from what you've seen, does it look more of like a representation of what you would have wanted to have done? Because I think now there's certainly more of cultural awareness,
right?
In the media and society in general. And I think, you know, they went into this movie with that awareness. Do you think maybe this would have been more of a representation of what you wanted to have done?
I'm not sure, because what I wanted to do was the philosophy, right? I wasn't so much interested in, I mean, I tried to make every character I wrote legit. I mean, in terms of what I was talking about before. So I tried to write a credible Asian character, but I was not interested so much in exploring the Asian condition as, you know, as the Asian philosophy. So I'd have to see the movie to say. I mean, the movie, they're taking the original story, taking out Fu Manchu, you know, but I mean, it's still, his father's a terrible guy, and he's, you know, and he's got this thing. So it's basically my story. But, you know, I didn't do, you know, world spanning helicopter flights and all the stuff that we're seeing in the trailers now. So, from what I understand, you know, when they did Black Panther, they discovered that a lot of Black people are very happy to see this. So then they thought, let's do the Asian version. And so the whole thing was done by Asians. And so I assume that it is what people today would want to see by way of a Marvel movie, you know. I mean, and you know, as far as if they stay with my story or my characters, then I'm basically happy. I mean, you know, I'm looking forward to this movie, you know. But I think it's probably much larger. I mean, I was more focused on the interior side of things, and I don't know how much they're doing of that, you know.
Yeah, I want to know, as a writer, because you were saying you want to make this a deeper book, you know, a book that focused a lot on philosophy. It's kind of like, you know, Kirby and Silver Surfer looking at a lot of different things. Is it tough when you have this idea, you have this focus of what you want to do, and the office or something just, they're not going with it?
Well, that usually didn't happen. I mean, in terms of the regular books, as I said, we had complete freedom. And another thing people ask me about is when Richard Nixon blows his brains out in the end of the Secret Empire thing. Did anybody object? It's like, no, because the book was selling and I was turning it in on time, and that's all I had to do. So there was really very little editorial stuff. But for Shang-Chi, we were proposing a book. And so Marvel felt, you know, like they had the right to say, well, shape it this way and do this thing here, you know. And as they say, we were not happy with either of the things that they insisted we do. But on the other hand, that's the only way we were going to do the book. So, you know, in that case, but they were, I mean, we were required to do it, but it was never like heavy. And, you know, they weren't like beating us down. They just said, this is what you have to do, you know? Yeah. And it's like, okay, I mean, we've been working together a lot, you know, so.
So one character I wanted to ask you about, since we're on the topic of Marvel, is Star-Lord, that you had development in creating.
Yeah.
And that character certainly has, you know, changed a bit over the years, but pretty damn great nonetheless. Where do you get that character from? Like, where do you pull that from? Is that like a kind of you know, harking back to like Buck Rogers and, you know, characters like that?
Hey everybody, Dollar Bin Bandits here. We're going to tell you about the best independent comic out there, none other than Yeet Presents.
Yeah, I'm thankful for so many things. I got the turkey on the table, I got the stuffing, I got the gravy, I got the mashed potatoes, and I'm going to have my Yeet Presents right next to me, because every month I'm thankful for these wonderful stories and art presented by the great talent that makes up Yeet Presents.
I love that it's an anthology. Do you know what an anthology is? I think you do, because you've seen some of those TV show anthologies. But basically what it means is that you're not weighed down by all of the stories that came before. There are some that continue, but there are some that are brand new. So you got new artists, you got new writers, you got new stories every month. Independent comics, support them, go to their Patreon. Yeet Presents has everything you need. It is the turkey, it is the stuffing, it is the whole cornucopia for your comics needs. Yeet Presents.
Well, not so much me, because I did create him, but I had a totally different idea for him. I deliberately made him as unlikable as possible in the first story. Mm-hmm. The idea being that he ended up at the sun, and I was going to have him go out through the solar system and have a different adventure on each planet and tie that into mythology. And so when he got to Venus, I wanted to do just a love story. And if he got to Mars, I wanted to do a war story. And he was eventually going to come out past Pluto and become the Star-Lord. That was my idea. But I only wrote the first issue where he's a complete asshole. And then, I mean, he was supposed to be a complete asshole. And then I left Marvel at that point. And so Claremont and other people, you know, picked up on it, and they're like, well, now what are we supposed to do? They didn't know what I was going to do. And so they started taking the edges off of him. And over time, he turned into the guy that we have now. I like the guy we have now. He's not the guy I would have ended up with, but I mean, you know, that's irrelevant. It's just, you know, I like where we are, but I mean, it's funny because, yeah, I created Star-Lord, but I didn't develop him into what he is now. Conversely, I created the Captain America that we all know, but I don't get credit for that because I didn't create the character. So it's basically who created characters that is the important thing. So, and then right next to him is Mantis, who has basically no relation whatsoever to the Mantis that I created. But I get credit, you know. So it's a funny business.
Well, you know. So I'm a big DC guy, as you could probably tell behind me. And I wanted to ask you about your work on Batman and your goal to make him darker, which I guess up to that point he was a little bit goofy in the sense of, I don't want to say goofy, but more akin to just a more lighthearted type of character.
He was a typical DC character,
goody two shoes, type thing. Did you get any criticism? Was there hesitancy on DC's part for you wanting to do that?
No, they in fact hired me in order to do that. Well,
Okay.
they wanted me to do it to everybody in the Justice League. I had quit Marvel, had a blow up over, they changed editors about 6 times, and I had a blow up somewhere in there. And I just said, screw it. You know, I had been given complete creative freedom. I wasn't about to like start working for people who were going to like be heavy on top. So I planned to, my wife had traveled in Europe before I met her. And so I thought, let's go to Europe. Let's go do that. And while we were setting that up, Jeanette Kahn called and said, you know, that stuff you did on the Avengers where you gave them all personalities, can you come do that for the Justice League? I mean, that was the pitch. Come do the Justice League like you did the Avengers, right? Because they were all icons, you know, they were all statues, but they didn't have, you know, nothing ever happened with their personal selves. So she hired me to come over and do the Justice League. And I said, I'll do that, but I want to do Batman's own book, because Batman, the first comics I ever read were Batman's. And I want to do my Batman, right? And I can do him as part of the Justice League, but it'd be like Doctor Strange in the Defenders, right? I mean, I want to concentrate on this guy. So that was, you know, that was the deal. And because she called me and asked me, they, you know, and I'm sure I said to them, well, I'm used to having complete freedom.
Mhm.
They said, okay. And that was interesting because Julie Schwartz was the editor on those books. And Julie was well known as not a hard ass guy, but he was a hands-on editor. And I'm sure that they basically had to go to him. Jeanette had to go to him and say, let this guy do what he wants to do. And Julie was great about it. It was really fun working for Julie. He never tried to, like, you know, push me to do anything, but I know that wasn't his usual MO. So they had to kind of clear that out for me.
The other question I wanted to ask you about is, so you've touched on all these characters that are now being turned into, you know, movie properties. Your work on Batman was really inspirational, or if not the source behind the Batman movie.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you?
Terrible. Well, terrible in retrospect.
All right, good night, everybody.
Yeah. Well, so they, you know, I wrote that first Batman run, and Michael Uslan said, "Oh, now I see how to do Batman for adults,"
mm-hmm.
which was what I tried to do in the book with Silver St. Cloud. I wanted to make Batman a grown-up person.
Right.
And so Uslan said, I see how to do that. And so for the next 10 years, they tried to make a movie out of it, and they got Hollywood screenwriters to adapt my story. And eventually they came to me and they said, none of them really gets the feel for it. So we want you to be what would basically be a script doctor on our scripts. And I did all that. And it was always Batman and Silver St. Cloud and Boss Thorne. And then, you know, my tenure ended and they continued, and then the movie came out, and to my great surprise, it was now Vicky Vale and Boss Grissom. And I said, what the fuck? And they said, well, you know, we would have had to pay you royalty. I'm sorry, you might have to bleep that.
Oh,
No.
Not a kid show.
They said, well, you know, we would have had to pay you royalties if we had used Silver St. Cloud.
Oh, God forbid.
And thereafter, neither Marshall Rogers or I got any Batman work together for like 20 years, 25 years. I mean, they really tried. See, I'm not a DC fan, sorry to say, but Marvel is a corporation, but there's a human touch in there somewhere. With DC, there's no human touch. It's just corporate. They figure everybody who's working for them is somebody getting a paycheck. You know, we give you money, you give us your creativity, we own it, end of story, and we don't have to worry about it after that. So they spent, you know, they really tried to sort of erase my participation in the movie and Marshall and my's source material for the movie. And then to take that even one step farther, when Christopher Nolan made his stuff, you can see our Dark Detective material in there.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm sure they just handed it to him and he used it as a springboard and inspiration, all that kind of stuff. Again, no credit, no, no thanks, no nothing, So I had an opportunity for detective number 800 or 1000 or whatever it was. They came and asked me to write a Batman story with Neil Adams, which is like my dream. And I couldn't do it. I started to do it and I just thought, I'm not doing any more Batman for these guys, So that's, there's the answer for whatever it's worth to you.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I really appreciate your honesty on the subject. I mean, it's certainly, you're not the first person to echo those sentiments. I mean,
No,
it's as much as I love DC, I can see, just certainly as a fan, the issues that they have behind the scenes. And if people like myself can see that, then it's got to be much worse than what is perceived, because they're constantly turning over, being sold from this person to that person, and it's clearly just no one really wants to handle it. They don't know what to do with it when they do have it. They don't have and just in terms of the movies, they don't have a Kevin Feige type character.
no, they don't.
They don't have someone championing the comics like they did, with Stan Lee and Marvel, which really is a unique situation, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, Kevin Feige's become the Stan Lee of the MCU, right? I mean,
Right.
He oversees the entire universe, and he gets it, and he likes it.
Yeah.
And they don't have anybody at DC, and I really don't get the impression. I mean, I can't say nobody ever, but by and large, they don't have a feel for it.
Yeah.
It's just a job. It's just a business.
Yeah.
We're just publishing this stuff and those guys are making it and we're paying them money and that's the end of it. And so it's like they got Batman, right? I mean, instead of making like a series of really cool Batman movies, the way Kevin Feige would do it,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of go, let's hire somebody famous and let him do his Batman, right? And so you get Christopher Nolan's Batman, and that's pretty good. And
Mhm.
And then you get you get Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman, and with a good script, it's a great movie. The second movie had a terrible script. It was not a good movie, right?
Right.
So Patty Jenkins is not like Kevin Feige here. She can only work with what she's got.
Right.
I mean, the solution to their problem is reasonably simple, which is like, hire me, or I mean that semi-ironically. I mean, me or somebody like me, somebody
Right.
who really gets it and wants to, and really wants to pull it off.
Yep.
But that would require, I mean, they'd have to like commit to like that, and that's not their corporate structure.
Yeah, I think they need to commit to actually wanting the property, and it doesn't seem like they really want to. I think they're doing, and this is as political as I get. Seems like they're just doing it to keep the lights on. They're not looking to really build on or expand. I mean, you have a few characters here and there that are new, but everything else is just recycled and rehashed. And we'll do a reboot and make it fancy for a little while, and then we'll fall back to our same the same business as usual.
Wasn't there at least rumors like a year ago that they were just going to stop publishing comics altogether and just do the movies or something?
I keep hearing that. It's it'll be a dark day if that happens. I mean, they could keep making movies, I guess, but their movies aren't doing so well. So that seems like a bad idea.
I'm looking forward to James Gunn's Suicide Squad because I believe in James Gunn, right? But
Yeah.
there again, you give it to somebody who knows what he's doing. I imagine Suicide Squad will be great.
I'm looking, as much as I didn't like the Flash in the Justice League movie, I am looking forward to his movie, which will incorporate the Michael Keaton Batman into it. If for no other reason, just to see Michael Keaton's Batman again.
Yeah, I thought Michael Keaton was a great Batman.
Yeah,
because Keaton, I think at the time, probably he was best known for Beetlejuice, and people thought, well, this guy's a comedian. What the hell?
yeah.
But Keaton has that kind of darkness inside him. I mean, as pleasant as he appears to be, there's always some sort of darkness. And I thought that was great for Bruce Wayne, So that'll be fun.
Yeah. One thing, I have sort of a fascination with the Epic line of comics.
Okay.
And you got there, you had Coyote, which was, again, you're back into the magic realm again.
Yeah.
Initially pitched that for the regular Marvel run, or is that something you held on to when Epic was announced?
Yeah, well, I did it first for Eclipse Comics, right? Marshall and I did it for Eclipse Comics, and it was just a one-shot. I don't remember whether we talked about doing any more, but it was like just a year or so later that Marvel started the Epic line, and they came and they said, "You got any ideas?" And I thought, well, I'd like to do Coyote some more. So, yeah. So,
did you like the idea of the creator-owned comics that they were sort of subset of Marvel, but you controlled? They were your own characters.
Yeah, well, I mean, they did exist in their own universe. Coyote was never going to meet the Fantastic Four, right? And yeah, so it was a chance for me to explore. Sorry. That's your mom.
Yeah.
A chance for me to explore something new, right? I mean, that's, to me, it's all the writing is exploration one way or another, and being able to do a guy who could say, "What the fuck?" That was interesting, and just not being tied to any larger universe, but just sort of exploring where that guy could go on his own.
Right.
So that was fun, and it did introduce me to the wonders of creator-owned material. I am unfortunately old school in that, when I came in, comics was run only one way, and so you didn't get together with an artist. Well, Starlin and I did that for Kung Fu, right? But that was like, that never happened. Usually they just said Sal Buscema's drawing your book, and you're like, okay, fine, and Sal's sick this month, so Don Heck's going to draw it. It's like, okay, fine, whatever. I mean, that was the way it was. So the idea of owning it, and we immediately ran into artist trouble on Coyote, and all of a sudden that was my responsibility, so I got introduced to both sides of that coin. Yeah, I mean, the great thing about creator-owned stuff is that you own it and you get all the benefits that accrue from it. But the other side is you're probably not going to get the mass distribution that you could get writing, the Hulk. So
I was going to say, did you feel Marvel pushed the Epic line enough as far as advertising? Because I know every once in a while in a book you see a Dread Star, an ad in the back or something like that, but it didn't really go much beyond that.
That's hard to say. I mean, I felt like they were giving it appropriate push. I didn't feel like they buried it or anything.
Right.
Could they have done more? They probably could have. Yeah.
Now, did you pick a young man named Todd McFarlane to do some backup stories, or was it?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that was me again, being in charge of the art, and this young man came to me and showed me his stuff, and I said, "Yeah, let's do that."
Right.
It's funny because he was I don't know if you've interviewed him, whatever, but I mean, he was the shyest, most respectful Canadian guy ever. Did you see it was 121 degrees in British Columbia yesterday?
No.
Yeah. Just that it was like the worst ever. But anyway, he used to call me Mr. Englehart, and I would say, no, it's, Steve is fine. But he would always call me Mr. Englehart. Then he became Todd McFarlane and went on from there. But it's interesting to have known him right at the start, right at the start.
Was Coyote, were you able to fulfill the vision you had when you first started the book to when the run ended?
Pretty much. I don't know that I had a goal. Again, I was exploring the character. And so, seeing where he would go issue by issue was what I was into. When they said, we're going to bring this to a close,
right,
I wrapped it up
right
at that point. But I didn't have a particular goal in mind other than just
telling his story.
Yeah, this guy. See what this guy was,
I thought it was pretty awesome. My last epic question would be, let's say there was Coyote fever sweeping the country. It became such a hot book. They want t-shirts, fans are going crazy for it. You own the property at the time. Do you think Marvel would have said, okay, let's put out the t-shirts, let's do figures, let's see how big this gets? Or because you owned it, they might have been like, well, I don't know about this.
That's unclear. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, Marvel was in charge of that stuff. And that stuff never happened, right? I mean, I would assume, if Coyote fever swept the country, I don't think it would have been on me to find merchandising deals.
Right.
I think they would have helped out with that. But it never happened, so I don't know. But again, I don't feel like they undersold it particularly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Do you see Coyote fever sweeping the country? Maybe
you never know, man.
I know.
You got mad.
No, so I still own him. You're right. I've used him actually in other things here and there because it's kind of like Englehart's Fifth World. I own a couple of characters, so I can mess with them.
Well, you did it. You teamed him up with Badger too.
Yeah. Well, that was. I'm drawing a blank, and I shouldn't on the guy who did Badger.
Mike Barron.
Mike Barron, yeah. Mike Barron and I were friends, and so we just sort of said, "Hey, let's do this."
Right.
He owns Badger. I own this. Let's do that. Yeah.
Oh, I think that was a cool team up. Want to skip ahead to Malibu.
Mm-hmm.
Get there. The Ultraverse. They're putting stuff together. You had Image started to come out, Valiant and stuff, and so Malibu's helping build their own universe. You were there for it. How was it pitched to you, or did you approach them to write for them?
No, they came to me. It was at San Diego in like 1991, maybe. They were going around. Malibu had been Image's publisher to start with, and they'd made a boatload of money before Image decided to become their own publisher. So Malibu said, well, let's start our own Image, but let's concentrate on writers rather than artists this time. Right. So they went to me and Gerber and the other guys, Jerry Jones, right. Mike Barr. They came to us and said, we want to put this thing together. Would you like to get involved? And they had a lot of money in those days. So they took us all to a resort in Scottsdale, Arizona for like 3 days. And it was just total creativity. It was really great if you're into creativity.
Right.
Because we're all just sitting there, going, well, here's my character. And the other guy would say, well, I want to do this character. And we'd go, well, you could add this and you could, and here's how we could work together. And I mean, it was really fun.
Yeah.
And so Malibu was just a joy to work with. Gerber and I were sitting by the pool one night and we were talking about how we had complete creative freedom at Marvel. Right. And here it was again, in the interim, it hadn't been there. People had been more hands-on and so forth. We were very happy to do this. And just circle back, they offered us, we wanted to own the characters, and Malibu said, no, we need to own the characters, but we'll give you a percentage of the profits. As it turned out, that meant that when Malibu got bought by Marvel, we didn't own the characters. And so it was up to Marvel as to what to do with them. And the contracts that we all had with Malibu said we got like 5% of the net or the gross, I don't remember, but it was some percentage of the income.
Right.
And as late as 2001, Revort asked me to bring the Malibu characters into the Marvel universe. And I wrote the first, or I plotted the first issue and had to give plots for the next 12 issues, which I hate doing. But I mean, we got that far. And then somebody took a look at those contracts and said, not only would we have to pay this guy extra money, but as soon as the word got out, the people writing the X-Men would show up and say, we want the same deal, right? And so they just, those characters went into a drawer and they've never come out since. Now Disney owns them. So, I mean, I have this faint hope that maybe someday somebody at Disney will go, Nightman is a decent character. Why aren't we doing it?
Prime is an awesome character too.
Yeah, well, there were a number of good characters in the Malibu universe who don't overlap the Marvel universe, any of that. But there's been, as I say, I was really, working it out. I had my usual good time of like the Malibu characters were like famous in their own world, and all of a sudden they're in the Marvel universe and nobody knows who they are, and they don't know who Spider-Man is. They don't know that they're supposed to care about Reed Richards. I thought there was a lot of really fun things you could do,
right,
integrating these two universes. In fact, my favorite idea was right at the end of the Nightman run, he had been split into two people, and I really wanted to do two Nightman books. I wanted to do the Marvel Nightman and the Malibu Nightman. And in the same way that they say that, it's that thing about the guy was one character up until this point, and now that he's going into two worlds, he's starting to diverge. And I thought it would be really interesting to write two Nightman books as one of them, but none of that stuff ever happened, right? So,
but I mean, at least you were able to create a universe, your own universe from your ideas. I mean, for a long time, doing other people's stuff, but you putting your own touches on it, expanding it. But now you can start from ground zero and build. As a writer, that must have been a real thrill.
It really was, because I had these ideas for the Strangers and for Nightman,
right?
And other people had ideas for Prime or for Hard Case or for
right,
whoever else. And so you had your characters, and then as you put them into the universe, and since it was all very friendly and collegial and upbeat, I mean, there was never any friction of like, well, I want to do this. No, you can't, because I'm, no, it's like, no, okay, do that. And then I'll make my character work with that. And then, it was a wonderful experience. I'm just, in terms of being a creative person,
right,
it was a wonderful experience. And it to this day, it bugs me that those characters are in a drawer,
just sitting. Yeah.
I'm sure given today, every property that has existed, someone is looking into and developing. So
right,
I wouldn't be surprised.
But Disney owns those guys. So unless Disney's looking into it, there's nothing.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
I
have faith.
I have one last question, and it's, you're such a strong writer, and you've done so much. When the time came in the 90s, did Valiant ever reach out to you? Because I would think you would have been perfect to work there, because they were a story pushed company.
Yeah, well, yeah, I did. Shooter asked me to come work for Valiant.
Right.
He wrote like the first 4 or 5 pages of the first XO, and then said he'd like me to take it over. That's kind of a little story, in that he said, if you will write XO for me,
right,
try to keep doing what I'm doing, then when you get your book, which was Shadow Man, you can do whatever you want to do.
Right.
And then I wrote the first issue of Shadow Man, and Shooter came to me and he said, well, I really believe in Stan Lee's theory that everybody should sound the same. And I know I told you that you could do what you wanted to do. And I told it, and feel free to tell this story, which is why I'm telling it. He said, I mean, you can tell people that I told you that you could do it, but I just can't pull the trigger on that. And so that was the end of my time at Valiant. I thought at the time, that's, Shooter's Shooter. He has many facets and stories and all that, but that was a stand-up,
Right.
approach to being Shooter.
Right.
Shooter likes rules, and so that was my time at Valiant.
Because I like, but if I had known that Shadow Man, if you would have had a run on Shadow Man, like I thought it was
First issue only. Me and Latham, we did the first issue. I plotted the second issue, but they threw that out and started over.
Did you like the direction they took at all, or
it was just totally different? I didn't, I was not involved in it, so I didn't feel one way or another about it. Basically, I took the stuff I was going to do with Shadow Man and turned it into Nightman. I mean, that's never been a secret either. I took the parts that I liked about the jazz musician, improv in the dark, all this kind of stuff, and just, repurposed it.
right?
And moved him from New Orleans to San Francisco. I mean, whatever. But I wanted to do that sort of character, that dark character, right? And so, I mean,
I thought you've done all right since then.
yeah. I'm pretty happy. And the weird thing, I say this all the time now, but I mean, we wrote all that stuff with the idea that it was periodical literature. Here we are entertaining people in 1972.
Right.
The fact that it's still being reprinted and, is, I mean, that was the high point of comics, the 70s, I think. They got as, not to say there weren't really good comics in other eras, but as a genre, as an era, that was, that's the stuff that everybody looks back on. The fact that it's still selling, the fact that people still discover it and like it, that's very, unexpected but gratifying. And then the movies. I mean, nobody thought there would ever be movies, right? That was, you guys probably know, there were a couple of bad Captain America movies and a mediocre Doctor Strange movie and some really bad animation series. I mean, that's what we thought. That's what we thought comics would, if they ever got anywhere, that's what it would be. So I enjoyed all the work that I did. It was just fun for me to do it. And then on the back end to get all this stuff thrown in there. I mean, it's been pretty good,
I had to ask about that Doctor Strange made for TV movie because I saw it for the first time last year. And I guess because I'm spoiled now with what's going on, I'm sure at the time, but when you were watching that, when it came out, you said it wasn't too bad.
I thought it was media. I thought it was, it was a TV movie, right? It was a TV movie. And I mean, it was better than the Captain America movies, right?
True.
They were not any good at all. So, I mean, I thought, they kind of, and I know Brunner worked on the storyboards for them. I mean, so they sort of, but the thing was, I mean, again, with the movies, and I've seen this, it used to be, you guys seem like you're knowledgeable. You're not old enough, but I mean, there was a time when comics only appealed to comics people, and everybody else not only didn't read them, but knew that they were terrible. I mean, it's like UFOs don't exist. Comic books are terrible. I mean, those are just things everybody knows, right? and so, which puts the whole idea that now everybody knows them, it makes that even more bizarre. But for years, anybody who did a comic book movie or a comic book thing, you could tell that their idea was, we're above this. I'm slumming here to be doing this. And so I'm going to do my I'm going to do what I'm getting paid to do here, but I don't have any feel for it. I don't, and I just, it's not going to be great, because how could it possibly be great? And again, Kevin Feige, right? Turned that around. And I might say that Michael Keaton Batman movie, which did, make him an adult, which did, give him a girlfriend, etc. That stuff that I did in the comics, to me, and why wouldn't it be? But I mean, I kind of look at that as like the beginning. We'd had the Christopher Reeve Supermans, and they were fun, but they weren't Marvel movie-esque, right? They had the funny henchmen. You always had to have the funny henchmen and stuff. Batman was the first movie that actually treated him like a dark character who was an adult. And then they slid back into, Mr. Freeze and George Clooney and whatever. But then the X-Men, and then, it's like you can sort of, but anyway, people came out of that thing. They stopped being apologetic for having to do superhero stuff. And now here we are, right? And now Black Widow's getting good reviews, right? So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I want to be cognizant of your time, but I have one question I got to ask is, what artist do you think captured your words the best?
I'm gonna give you an honest answer, which is not gonna sound like an honest answer, but because I had wanted to be an artist, it was the comic book art that really dragged me in. It was Dick Sprang and Batman and stuff that made me sit up and take notice. And having worked with Neil Adams and having done a little bit of art on my own before I got shunted off to the other side, I just really like art. And so every story that I did, the good thing was when I would write it, I could visualize it. I could see how I would draw it, right? So I have that extra skill in that I could see how art could be done, but I never expected it to be done that way, right? Because I wasn't doing it. I just knew that it could be done, right? I wasn't asking people to draw, 18 panels a page with the Justice League in every one of them, right? And stuff like that. I could see, it could work. So it was always a treat to me. Then I would send out my story and then I'd get pages back. And it was always fun to see, how people did this. And I mean, some artists are better than others and this and that and the other thing. But even the guys that I worked over the years with a couple of people here or there that I didn't think were that great, but even then it was like, well, yeah, but I can see what they're doing and I understand, and I mean, I don't know if it was George Perez's first work on Avengers, but you can see on Avengers, if you read those issues, you can see a young guy getting started and the next month he's better and the next month he's better and the next month he's better. And I love that stuff, So the only artist who can draw what I see is me, right? And I'm not doing it. So otherwise, I'm just happy to see what other people can be inspired to do,
So welcome back. That was our interview with Steve Englehart. Pretty interesting. What a great career he's had. So much great work he's done, all of which I have really enjoyed.
Yeah, you think about, especially, you mentioned DC, but all of his time with Marvel, how many components of the Marvel universe he's written for and touched on and influenced, and really a prolific writer.
Yeah, I just can't. It's hard to sort of contain his entire career into one interview, especially with all of the publishers he worked for. But I think guys did a great job of getting as comprehensive as possible. And, maybe we have him back someday. You never know. With that, that'll do it with our interview with Steve Englehart. And now, of course, your favorite part of the program, where I say Dollar Bin Bandits a lot. Hey, we're on YouTube. Dollar Bin Bandits. You're probably watching us right now. If you're not, you're probably listening to us. So we are on all major podcast platforms. Hey, we're on social. Facebook, Dollar Bin Bandits. Instagram, Dollar Bin Bandits. Twitter, DB Bandits. Write us an email, please. Or we're going to stop saying write us an email. So you don't want us to stop doing that. dollarbinbandits@gmail.com. All right, guys. That was fascinating. More stuff to come on Dollar Bin Bandits, so stay tuned and we will see you next time.